Hi, and welcome to the Rental Realm, where transparency meets opportunity in the world of real estate investing. I'm your host, Nicole, traveling full-time in an RV, connecting with real estate agents and investors all across the U.S. to give you an inside look of what's really happening inside of our rental markets. From short-term to long-term rentals, we're uncovering the numbers behind these deals. Today, I am so excited to introduce a very special guest, Michelle. Michelle and I met back in February at a conference in Florida and have been keeping touch since then. It's incredible to see what she's done since February to now, and I'm so excited for you guys to all meet her today. Michelle, thank you so much for joining us today at the Rental Realm.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
We're super excited to dive into this. And for those of you that don't know Michelle, it's going to be very inspiring story to see what she's done in just 2 years of investing. So Michelle, I would love to just start off and have you tell everyone how you got started in real estate.
I was actually in law enforcement for a decade. That was my passion. That is what I thought my 30-year career was going to be. I really enjoyed it. That's what I wanted to do since I was younger. I wanted to be a cop, and I did, and it was great. As we all know, law enforcement doesn't get paid that great. And so If I wanted extra money, I would have to work a detail, which is like giving up a whole off day. And the main detail that I would do is taking inmates on the trash truck to a dirty road and sitting in the van and watching them pick up trash.
Oh, man.
And that's my whole day. I would only clear like $200 from it. And I'm like, man, this sucks, And so I really wanted to have some rental properties. And when I first met my husband, I was like, what do you think about rentals? And he's like, I don't want to do that, because his dad was a landlord and he had, lower quality properties. And so my husband grew up only seeing the bad side of people trashing houses, not paying rent. And he's like, I don't want anything to do with that. And so a couple of years, I'm like, what do you think about rentals? He's like, yeah. And finally I got to the point where it was like, I want a rental. I'm going to do this with or without you. We have a really great marriage and the best one I've ever had. And I finally told him, I think it was 2021. I was 29 and I said, babe, I love you. I want to do this together, but I will buy rental properties with or without you. And he's like, oh, okay. And so we started the process. And so how I got the first one, I emailed a guy at the bank, a lender that another local landlord had told me about. And I emailed him and I was like, hey, I want a rental property. What do I need to do? And he sent me a list. He's like, here's the application. I need your tax returns and your driver's license and all this stuff. And so I sent it all to him and I was like, how much money do I have to have? And he's like, you need 50% of the purchase price. And I'm like, okay. And so I start looking at properties, for my phone, driving around, and I'm realizing I don't want crack houses. I don't want low quality stuff. I have a really high standard. I didn't know I was so bougie. And so I'm trying to find nice houses. And in my area, the average rental house that I'm buying is about $100,000 for the purchase price. And then I average about $15,000 of rehab going into it. And my average appraisals are 160 up to 170. And those are really nice houses. And so in the beginning, trying to get that first one, I realized I'm a cop, my husband's a cop, we don't make much, we have debt like everybody else. Yeah. And it just felt impossible to try to raise $15,000, trying to save money. It just wasn't possible. And so a few months go by, and out of frustration, I emailed again and I'm like, dude, I'm never going to have $15,000. What else can I do? Is there any other option that I can get a property with no money down? Or what's the least amount? And he wrote back and was like, look, if you can buy the property, rehab it, and keep all your costs under 85% of the appraised value, we'll do it for no money down. I'm like,
awesome.
Why didn't you start with that? What I need. Cool, I'll rehab a property. I don't know how, but I'll figure it out,
Yep.
So March 2022, I bought the first property. We rehabbed it. We did 99% of the work ourselves. And at that time, I was working an 8 to 5. I was in a office position. People would love to have that position. I loved having it. It was kind of like the dream thing, 8 to 5. And I was teaching other cops, firearms, defensive tactics, suicide prevention, all those kind of things just in the training division. And I got the first property, rehabbed it. I learned how to do everything myself. So I called a guy and I was like, hey, I know you do tile floors. Can you come teach me? and I'll pay you just to teach me how to
smart.
do it. Because I only borrowed enough to buy the house and to buy the materials. And so I had to do all the labor. And so I learned how to lay ceramic tile floors. I painted the whole house. My husband and I ripped off the countertops together on a weekend, put the new ones in, and we did everything. And so that's pretty much how we got started. Was like, I say fortunate to find a bank that would allow that. And I know
Absolutely.
sometimes that sounds discouraging because people are like, oh, well, I don't have a bank that'll do that. But that bank tapped out at one point and they said, hey, we can't do any more of those no money down. You're going to have to bring money. And I thought, like, they can't be the only bank in the whole country that's willing to do that. And so here's my gold nugget. I emailed the title company that I was using and I said, hey, what other banks do you see other investors using? Give me your top 5. And they said, okay, well, this bank, closes a lot of investor deals. And, oh, that investor, he only uses this bank. And I'm like, cool. So I started emailing those banks and I'm like, hey, I've been doing this no money down loan. If we do it this way, are you doing anything like that? And I found a second bank and they said, yeah, we'll match that deal. So,
There you go.
I've got 2 and then I just found a third one recently. And so it's not something they're advertising and put on commercials. But if you ask, sometimes they will.
And that's a lot of it, of just having to find the right connections in real estate. It's not something you necessarily have handed right to you or easy to do, but if you're willing to do that little bit of legwork, which you've definitely done and proven that it can be super useful for your future.
I feel like a lot of it is how bad do you want it? Because I have talked to people and they're like, oh, well, I asked one bank and that one bank said no. And I'm like, okay, go to the next one. Like I have the mentality, like I'm not going to let anybody tell me that I can't do something.
There's always a yes out there. And if you're willing to work for it, you do have to go through a lot of no's sometimes, but there's always a yes at the end of the road. And so I would love for you to tell people a little bit about your market. I don't think a lot of people will know this area. So just tell me a little bit about why you actually started investing in this area.
Yeah, so I live and invest in West Monroe, Louisiana. And if you've never heard of it, it is a little bit smaller, but our big shining ticket is that this is where Duck Dynasty is. And so a lot of people have watched the Duck Dynasty show and they're like, oh, okay, that's where it's at. So yeah, Northeast Louisiana, top right of the boot. My average purchase price for a rental is about $100,000. I try to get like in the 90s. I've got a couple in the 80s. The most I've ever paid for an LTR was, I think, 127. And it was already pretty nice. I knew I was going to get really high rent for it. And so, like I said, 100,000. And then I average 13 to 15,000 on the rehab. I pretty much do paint and floors every time, new countertops and backsplash every time, all new light fixtures. I have to have matching fans. That's a thing for me. Like I can't just leave a black fan and a white fan.
I appreciate that. That drives me crazy.
Yeah, that's the purchase side of things. Now on the rent prices, I do feel like I am slightly above average. So for a 3-2, it's probably 12 to 1,300, whereas most of my 3-2s are going to be 14 to 1,500. My highest rent, nice. I have a couple houses at 1,600, and some people are insulted. They're like, "Oh my God, how dare you ask 1,600? That's more than my house note." And I'm like, "It's a really nice house." So they stay full. Like people are happy to pay that amount because they have a gorgeous house in a great school zone. And one in particular, she has told me, and her house is beautiful. Like it's fully decorated. It looks like a homeowner. It doesn't look like a rental property because it's so cute. And she has told me, like, we have Christmas here. We have Thanksgiving here. Like I have the nicest house out of my family. And I'm so happy and grateful to have a nice house with a good landlord too, So that's been kind of my thing, is like trying to get outdated houses and then bringing them up and making them cute. And my standard is, if my house burns down in the middle of the night and I have a vacancy, I'm not worried about moving into my vacancy. Like, I want it to be safe and clean and pretty. And so that's kind of my standard. But yeah, as far as the prices, 100,000 to buy. And I think my average rent is around 14 to 1,500.
That's great, because I know markets that are much more expensive than that for purchase prices, and they're not able to get too much more than that for their long-term rental rate. So that's amazing. And I'm in San Antonio, Texas right this moment, and there's definitely houses where they're up to $200,000 plus, and that's all they're able to pull in. So I know you focus mostly on doing long-term rentals. Have you ever explored doing short or midterm rentals in your area? Or is it that just the best deal of sticking with long-term rentals?
So when I first started, I didn't know anything about real estate. Like I came from the cop world, and everything I've learned about real estate has been through audiobooks. And me going to the lender and verifying, I'm like, hey, my book said this. Like, is that real? Like, does that apply to Louisiana? He's like, yeah, that's real. I'm like, okay. So I only knew about long-term rentals. You know, I've heard of Airbnb, but it didn't register. My understanding of Airbnb was that is only in vacation areas. And so I didn't even realize that we had STRs here until another investor was talking about it. And I'm like, we have Airbnbs here? What? And I'll pull up the map and we have like 30 of them. I'm like, I didn't even know. And then I did not know midterm rentals existed until end of last year. So this is October. I found out, I think in December, that midterm rental was a thing. The only way I found out about that is because I was rehabbing a house that I was going to list as an LTR. And another investor came up and he was like, hey, I need to rent your house. And I'm like, don't you have a nice house? Like, what do you mean? And he was like, told me this story. He's like, I have a house on Furnished Finder. It was supposed to be available on such and such day. And my current tenant extended. I forgot to change my calendar. This other guy has booked. And so now I'm double booked and I need another place for him. And your house is like a block away. And I know it's nice because I know how you do it. I know how you do things. And he was like, I'll rent the house. I'll furnish it. I'll pay the bills. I just need this house. And I was like, okay. And I found out the house that he had bought and made into this midterm rental. And I looked at that house before him, and the sellers like needed to leave town. And they're like, we just want payoff. And it was like 140, I think. And I'm looking at it like, there's no way I can cash flow at 140. Like, I love the house. I really want to help, but like, I can't cash flow. But it's like, I had tunnel vision of just long-term rentals. I didn't know about anything else. And so I was like, that's the house you bought? Like, how did you cash flow? And he's like, oh, I made it a midterm. And I have a woman living there that is building her house, and she keeps firing the contractor and she keeps extending. And I'm like, oh, like my mind was blown. And so I did LTRs because I didn't know any other way. And so now that I know, I have considered an STR, but for my area, like, I don't want to discredit. Our area does have a lot of great things, and a lot of new things are being built and coming, you know, new big companies and fun things to do. Like, yes, that's all here, but I don't think it's as strong as like the beach. So I'm not going to do an STR here. However, I probably will do an MTR. I'm actually planning to do the first one in a couple months. We bought an 8 unit next to college, and I'm going to try to make one of those an MTR, just because I have personally seen there is a need for that with like somebody's house burned down or, you know, insurance problems or whatever. I've had several people ask me now, like, hey, do you have anything I can rent, you know, just for a couple months and like some extra furniture? And so I'm like, I think I'm going to jump on that one.
I think a lot of people are probably going to start looking at this area because it's so hard in most markets we travel through. I'm searching on Zillow constantly to see if there are any houses that would really cash flow as a long-term rental. And that's so hard to find out, which is why I think there's just been such a crazy upsurge of short-term and midterm rentals in all these markets. In San Antonio, I think there's 6,000 or more short-term rentals at this point. And it's great that if you can make it work as a long-term rental, I give you all the credit. Do it if you can. And it's just so awesome to hear that you're able to be successful with that. I would love to hear about one of your favorite rental properties and just kind of breaking down the numbers a little bit. I know you've typically done the BRRRR method. And for those that aren't familiar with the BRRRR method, if you would go into that a little bit more.
I have actually BRRRR'd every single property but one. So as of right now, I have 32 doors and 31 have been rehabs. So it sounds like a lot, but it's really not. Some of them were huge projects. Some of them like, well, the biggest project we're doing, this 8 unit that we just bought, you know, small multifamily, we're doing $100,000 worth of rehab. That's huge to me.
Okay.
You know, I could buy a house with that. So like that is the biggest. On the cheapest side, one of the properties, it was a mobile home. And it was very well maintained. It was a one owner. They went above and beyond to do everything they could. It's on concrete. Like, it is beautiful. Front porch, back porch. It's out in the country. Cool. Like, deer come up on the porch. Like, it's amazing. And there really wasn't anything I could do to make it nicer, except I was like, okay, we can add some more gravel to the driveway, and I'm going to add some landscaping because there wasn't really any there. And so that's kind of my, like, the bare minimum. Like, I had to do something to show the bank that really what it was, I had such a great deal on it, but I still had to show some rehab. And so I'm like, okay, we're going to add gravel and do landscaping, you know, just to show the bank the rehab budget. But really, it was already a great property. Now, as far as my favorite property, I have favorites for different reasons. As far as the BRRRR strategy goes, the fourth one was my favorite, my fourth property, because it was my first real BRRRR that I was able to take money out of. So what happened? The house was listed, and I would say about half of my properties have been listed, and I just make low offers. You know, I'm not pulling that number out of thin air. Like, I look at what the rent is, and I subtract what my, you know, expenses would be, and I pick how much cash flow I want. And then whatever's left, like, that's going to be my note. And so then I figure out what the loan would be and what my offer could be. And so I throw that number. And so sometimes people are like, oh, how do you get these great deals? And it's like, well, I made the offer and they accepted. Like, that's how I got it so cheap, you know. They're not going to say, oh, you want to give us 100? Well, we'll give it to you for 90. You know, like, you have to start low and then you can come up. And so I bid low on this property. It had been sitting for several months. It looked nasty in the pictures. I went to go see it in person. It was worse. It's right next to the college, and the owner was out of state. So I'm in Louisiana. I think the owner was in Florida maybe. And it was obvious, like, he wasn't keeping track of it. There was a lot of maintenance issues. There were, like, dead roaches everywhere. Like, it was just disgusting. So we bid on it, and the guy immediately accepted. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, really? And this is only my fourth house, which is still in the first year. This was in 2022. And this was about summertime. I think it was like August or September. And I'm like, wow, he immediately accepted. Like, I should have went lower. You know, that was my first thought. And so at the time, my realtor, Drew, he was amazing. And he, you know, ran comps on the house. And he's always been like Johnny on the spot. Like, within $1,000, he can pinpoint what the comps are. And so he told me, like, oh, it's going to be 100 or whatever it was. Well, we submitted our reno budget. Like, this is what we're going to do: paint, floors, bathroom, etc. Submitted that to the bank. The bank took my contract and my rehab budget, gave it to the appraiser. The appraiser goes out. He looks at my list and he says, this house is going to be worth 110. So whatever number he gave me, like, whatever number my realtor gave me, the appraisal came back like 10,000 higher. And I was like, oh, that's amazing, you know?
Nice.
So fast forward, we do the reno. It's pretty cute. It's like 2 minutes from the college, and I rent it, and I'm looking at the numbers, and I had already finished the BRRRR book: buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat. And I finished that book, and I understood the concept. Like, the bank will give you 85%, my bank will give you 85% of the appraised value, regardless of what your original loan was. And so I understood the concept, and I'm looking at the numbers, and I'm like, well, here's my full loan amount. Here's the appraisal. There's a $9,000 gap there. And so I was scared, but I emailed my banker, and I'm like, hey, my book says that I could have that money. Like, is that real? Like, can I really have that? And he's like, yeah, how do you want it? And I'm like, really? And so I was like, check, please. And so he wrote me, well, you know, gave me a $9,000 cashier's check. And to my understanding, okay, I'm not an attorney or CPA or whatever, but that money is not taxed. Like, that is part of your loan. So you're not paying income taxes on that. So that $9,000 is like free money. And so, again, I was a cop at the time. My husband's a cop. We have credit card debt like everybody else. And I actually had a 0-turn mower that we had financed, because when we bought our house in 2020, we have like 4 acres and we had a push mower. So, like, we had to get a 0-turn, and we had financed it.
Oh, God, I can't imagine push mowing that.
Yeah. It's so fun to get on my riding mower and do it now. So I got a $1,000 chunk, and I was like, oh my God, I can pay off like all kind of things. And so I went and paid off my mower, and I paid off some credit cards. And all the bills that I paid off added up to like $500 a month. And then I cash flowed $400 a month on that property. So it's like that one property technically $900 a month. And it was just so exciting to actually pull money out of a property and like everything's okay, like nothing bad's going to happen. And so that was at the point that my husband was like, maybe we can do some more rentals, maybe we can find some more of those. And I'm like, yeah, let's find more of these, So that is really my favorite one because it was the first time we pulled money out and we paid off debt, and it literally made such a difference for our month to month. Like we're paycheck to paycheck like everybody else. And it really made a difference of like, wow, I have an extra $500 that would be going to bills, but we can do what we want. We can start putting stuff in savings. And so that was like what really got me addicted to the BRRRR.
And that's incredible. I mean, $9,000 is huge for a lot of people and can be maybe 3-4 months of work for some people, or even possibly more. So getting that by your fourth property is absolutely amazing. And I mean, the amount that you've scaled and grown at this point already so far is so fun to see, because I think February, I believe you had 19, if I remember correctly. And you were like, oh, I only have 19 properties. And now at 32, so that's just absolutely wonderful. And it's been so inspirational to see what is possible in just 2 years. So have you had any properties that didn't quite meet the expectations, or one that maybe blew expectations out of the water from what you had initially projected and what you thought you were originally going to get this?
We had a property that it was a 3-2. It was listed and it was like stuck in time. Like every room had wallpaper. Like the dining room was like burgundy wallpaper. The house was so ugly, inside and out. Like it was so ugly. It was so outdated. And we realized like, oh, this is going to be a great opportunity to make this from a 3-2 into a 4-2, because one of the previous owners had enclosed the garage and made this huge room. And they, I guess, were using it as a living room. So you had this big living room, and then you had a regular living room with a fireplace, and then you had a formal dining room. You had a good sized kitchen. And it's like, why would you not make that into a bedroom? And all that you need to make it a bedroom is a closet and a door. And so we put on our reno budget, like, oh, we're doing paint and floors and like all these things. And then we're going to make it into a fourth bedroom by adding a door and a closet. And so I was expecting our appraisal to be, I don't know, it was like 130 or 140. And we did all the work and it actually came back at like 170. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that is huge. It was way higher than that. And so we had all this equity. And then on the flip side, I still rented it for $1,500, which is pretty high for our area. But I couldn't truly BRRRR the property. I couldn't take the money back out because the rent would not have covered the loan on it. And so that really sucked. Like, man, I've got all this equity sitting there and I can't pull it because the rent's not going to cover. However, I can still cross-pledge that equity. And so we have done that. We've used that equity on paper as a down payment to buy something else. But that was the coolest one because it was like, I think I bought it for like $90,000, and then I'll have to go look. I think we put like $20,000 into it. So it's like we had a 110 loan on it, but had so much equity. For whatever reason, like I guess I was still new and I wasn't realizing like when you change it from a 3 to a 4 that it was going to be that drastic. And then my taxes went up too, so that sucked. But the cash flow is great, and it's my only 4-bedroom, and people ask for 4 bedrooms all the time, and I'm like, well, I have one, but it's full.
It's hard to find those larger properties for a rental house. It's easy to find 2-3 bedroom properties, but when you're going into the 4 or more bedrooms, that's tough. And I know people that have 5 or 6 kids, and finding something between $1,500 or $1,600 a month would be incredible for them. So that's awesome that you're able to offer that for these families in your local market. And I know for your market that is on the higher end, but at the same time, for people that maybe are looking for somewhere to relocate to, this could be a great opportunity for them. And the fact that you're making them really nice places for people too. It's not just here, I'm going to paint over the pieces of tape and everything looks livable, but actually making it a nice home where a family can come into and have holidays. And speaking of taxes, I'm really curious if you'd be able to break down some of the monthly expenses you have. Do you use property management at this point? And if so, what are the management fees if you do? And what are the taxes like in your area?
going back to looking at that first property and listening to audiobooks, and they're like, okay, you got to pay the note and the property taxes and the insurance and property management, and you got to save for vacancy and you got to save for maintenance. And I'm like, whew, okay. And I'm adding up all these things, and it's like 10% for this, 10% for this. And I'm doing the math, and like nothing cash flows. And so I got irritated, and I'm like, what's the bare minimum? Like, what do I have to pay to own this property? And that is the note, or some people call it the mortgage. I call it the note, the property taxes and the insurance. And I'm like, I'll self-manage, if something breaks, like AC goes out, whatever, I'll just put it on my credit card. Like, I was just so desperate to get in, and nothing would cash flow looking at all those other things. And so that's how I started. I self-managed out of necessity. And I also enjoyed self-managing because I've heard all these horror stories about property management companies. Like, they don't care about your property. They're in no rush to rent it. And I'm like, I just spent 20 grand in my own blood, sweat, and tears to renovate this property. And I don't want somebody to come in and trash it. And so I chose to self-manage, and it, also saves me a little bit of money. In my area, 10% is kind of the standard. I know some people doing 8%, people doing 12%, but 10% is really the standard. And so I started doing it, because I had to and because I wanted to. Now, since then, I'm now 2.5 years in, and a couple months ago, I realized like I was still doing all of the work. I was still laying floors. I'm like flipping whole houses 90% by myself. Sometimes my husband would take off. Yeah, it was backbreaking. And I'm like, I'm 30, feeling like I'm 50. I know this is not what I need to do long term. But in the moment, it's like, I don't have the money to pay somebody. Like, I want to keep going. Like, it felt like I had to do it. And so, my husband would take off work for a day, and he would pass me the tile, and I'd lay it down, and then I'm like, oh, go cut this piece, and he'd cut it and bring it back. And, so like we're doing it together. So now fast forward, I have hired my first employee primarily because I read the book Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell. And I'm like, I'm understanding that I can't grow. I can't like look at new properties and talk to new banks if I'm laying floors. Yep. And also the whole reason I'm doing this is because I want to make money and not work myself to death. And so by the time I'd quit, I was making 80% of my sergeant salary after like 14 months. 14 months after buying the first property, I'm making most of my salary. And I've been there for 10 years. And so by the time I left, I'm like, I know what I'm going to do. Like, I'm going to scale. I'm going to go really big. I'm going to do great things. And for me to get there, like, I have to have a team of people. And so anyway, a couple months ago, I hired my first employee, and she's kind of a property manager, but I call her more of like my assistant, my executive assistant, admin assistant, whatever. But she had no experience in property management, and that's what I wanted. I wanted somebody that didn't know anything, that didn't have any bad habits, and I could teach her exactly how I want it managed. You're going to go to their Facebook and you're going to stalk them. And if it's got anything, anti-police, or if they're disrespectful or whatever, I'm like, I want you to go to their pictures and zoom in. And if they got nasty counters, no, like if their house is dirty, and, when you're doing show-ins and they pull up, if they've got a bunch of McDonald's wrappers in their car and their car's nasty, no, And so I've been able to like pass that over to her. So now I have property management. So anyway, back to the numbers. In the beginning, I was only paying the note, the property taxes, and the insurance. And property taxes in my area, some of my houses are as low as $500 a year, and some are $1,500 a year. I don't think I have anything over that. So yeah, so it's fairly cheap. I mean, Louisiana is pretty cheap. Now, we make up for it with like terrible roads and poor education, but we have some cheap houses. The cost of living is significantly lower. So now, fast forward to today, we have 32 properties. I pay for my office. I have 4 offices. So there's mine, my assistant. We made a kids' room. So we've got toys and Barbie dream houses and kitchens and stuff. And so I bring my kids up here. She's got a bunch of kids that she can bring. And it's like we can actually, conquer the world, and our kids are in the next room playing. And then we have an extra office in the back that I'm probably going to add somebody to pretty soon. And then we have the lobby. And so I pay for the office and the CAM fees for that. I pay her salary, and we're starting to add little things. I'm finally at the point that if I have an oil change in my car, I can actually pay for it out of my business account. So little things like that have added, but still for the most part, like I don't have HOA fees. I don't have any extra stuff. It's still just the note, the taxes, and the insurance.
How is insurance in your area? I don't know if that's something that's more crazy just down south, or if you guys can get hit with the storms too. I think you guys were pretty good, if I remember, from this latest storm that just rolled by.
We had like a little bit of rain the other day, and that was it. And very grateful, that our area was safe. And I hate thinking about these other areas that got flooded. Our insurance is, I think, pretty good. I mean, my average rent house is between 60 and 80 bucks a month. Talking to some other girls in my mastermind that live in South Louisiana, they're like, what? How is that possible? And I'm like, I'm sorry. But we figured it out. I mean, if you're south of, I-10, like if you're South Louisiana, like it's 3 times the price. They're paying hundreds a month. And I'm like, yeah, my highest is like 80 bucks, and that's a really nice house, so. That's
incredible. We were just looking at some places in Florida, and I got a quote for $16,000 for the year, which is a nice house at $699,000. But just hearing $80 a month, that's awesome. Would love to see that. And everything you've done there, the coolest thing about your story is just that you were a regular full-time worker and you've done so much of the work yourself. A lot of people want to jump into this, start making $1,000, $2,000 their first month on their first property and have someone else do all the work too. And in today's world, that's just not reality anymore. You're not going to be able to have someone fully take care of everything from day one. And I think that's where a lot of us get burned off at the start, is wanting it to be passive income. Going to become this real estate investor and it's going to be easy. I'm just going to hire someone else to do all the work. And you're at the point now, 2 years later, where you're actually starting to get help. And Chris is awesome, by the way. I got to meet him when we were in Montana together. But you were really the driving force of all of this that you guys have done the last few years. And I think he was hesitant at first, but now I know he's so excited and you guys are going to conferences together. But you've done so much of this back end work to get to the point that you're at now. And you've set yourself up where, I don't know if you're comfortable saying how much your total portfolio is worth now, but it's a very impressive number in just 2 years.
I related to Heather's video so much where she says she made her first $1 million and she didn't have anybody to tell it to. And I'm like, I remember hitting the first $1 million of appraisals. It's just, we had a lot of houses, felt like to me, and you add those appraisals up and it's like, wow, we have $1 million worth of real estate. That is mind blowing. And I still have $5 in my bank account. I was like, this feels like a millionaire. This don't feel like millionaire, And so we hit $1 million in appraisals, and then we hit 2, and then we hit 3. And I'm like, this is insane. Like, I still feel poor, So now with some of our recent things, like we are just under a $4 million portfolio, which is primarily single family homes. We just added our first small multifamily, and then I have 1 commercial building. And so appraisals were at $4 million. The cash flow, when I first started, because my father-in-law had rentals and, he bought them 30 years ago for like $20,000 and $30,000. And they are a little bit lower quality, a little bit. Yeah. I'm like so jealous, but they're not in that great of areas. And he gets, a little bit lower rent. And so he said, when I first started, I just wanted to make 50 bucks. If I could make 50 bucks, I'm happy. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to try that, but I'm going to bump it to 100. And so looking at deals the first year, I'm like, if I could just make $100, I'll do it. I know it's going to appreciate. I know one day it's paid off. I'll keep the whole rent, So that's what I was looking at. And then turns out that first one, we made $300 a month. And I was like, oh, that's pretty good, And so my average cash flow per property, I guess the average is $300. I have some as low as like 80 bucks. Which is bad.
Which for a long-term rental, a lot of people are happy if they're just breaking even at this point. So the fact that all of yours are cash flowing is awesome.
Yes, everything cash flows, everything is positive. And what happened on that $80 one, it originally was going to be more than that, but I learned a very valuable lesson. So I bought when the interest rate was like, 6%. And that was the one that I just needed to add gravel and landscaping. And so because it was so easy and I was starting to buy multiples at a time, I'm like, oh, that'll take a day. Let me go focus over here because I bought the property on a Friday and I rented it on Sunday. immediately rented it, immediately had rent. My note's not even due yet. I'm just banking all this cash. And so a couple months go by and I'm like, oh yeah, we need to go do that. So we added the gravel, we did the landscaping. I go to the bank. I'm like, hey, I'm ready to refinance this one. And he's like, yeah, the interest rate's now 6.5 or whatever. Like it had gone so much higher. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. I've already signed a 1-year lease with these people. And I now have no control over what the note is going to be because the interest rate was rising and I wasn't paying attention. And so we were actually like negative $20 for the first year. And it was really like about 6 months because the first 6 months was an interest only. The notes were cheaper. But then once you term it out and put it on that 20-year AM, like the note went up. I was negative $20 for like 6 months. And I'm like, oh, I'm a terrible business person. And finally, after their 1 year, we were able to raise the rent a little bit, just a little to get it back positive. And so it's at $80 right now. However, my tenant just told me that they're buying a house. They're moving out at the end of this month. I was getting, I think, $950 rent, but I had another one that I just bought close to it that I rented very, very similar, that I rented for $1,100, and I had people fighting over it. And I'm like, okay, so now I've posted that one for rent $1,100, and I already have people interested. So now my cash flow's, really going up just because I was able to raise the rent so much. And I've only had that property for, 2.5 years now. So yeah, my average cash flow is, around 300, but really it's like, 1 to 5. Now on my commercial property, that is one of my favorite cash flow ones because I didn't know anything about commercial real estate. And I was looking at, like, I want an office because I've had a home office and my kids are getting Play-Doh on my settlement statements and they're like using all my sticky notes. And I'm like, ugh. So I was like, I have to have a real office. And, now that I'm getting more properties, what if I have to meet the tenant and give them the keys? Like, I don't want to come to my house, but sometimes I don't want to drive to the property because some of them are like an hour away. And so I started looking at this commercial building thinking that I'll keep one office and I'll rent the other 10. Well, as I'm going through buying it, this business came up and they're like, oh, we love it. We want the whole building. And I'm like, oh, okay. And the rent was like really good. And I was like, okay. But again, I didn't know anything about commercial real estate. And so I called some other investors that I've met along the way in these last 2 years. And I was like, hey, I'm buying a commercial building. How do I do a commercial lease? I had no idea. And 2, I think, fairly large investors in my area both told me, make sure you do a 3% increase every year built in. And then my tenant wanted like a 10-year lease. And I knew better not to do that. Because I'm like, what if the insurance goes down? Whatever happens, like I don't want to be negative on it. And so I agreed to a 3-year lease and I structured a 3% annual increase. And so the first year they pay $3,500 rent. And then the next year it's going to be like $36.15. And then the third year will be $37 and some change. And so year 1, I'm cash flowing like $700 and it's only going to go up from there. So that one, I'm like really proud of that one.
Very nice. And how much was that property?
Let me tell you how I got it. It's a pretty cool story. I'm a little proud of myself on this one. So it was not listed. It was on Facebook and several people had sent me the link to it. They're like, oh, look at this building. And I'm like, I don't know anything about commercial real estate, but okay. So I messaged the lady and I'm like, hey, I love your building. Can we talk about it? And long story short, she's like, I want $250. And I'm like, okay. It was like an office building. So she was into the mortgage business. And at one point, they were using the whole building. It's like 10 offices and a lobby and a little kitchenette. And cool. When COVID happened, she moved to working from home and she loved it. And so she owns this building because she was a very successful, mortgage person. And so since then, in the last few years, she's just rented offices here and there. And so when I'm looking at it, there's an insurance guy that was taking up like 4 offices. And then she had a back office and everything else is vacant. And she told me how much this insurance guy was paying for these couple offices. And so my original offer was just based off of his rent alone. Like if his rent can cover the note, that gives me time to like rent the other ones to use as cash flow. But that was going to be like 100 something. And she's like, no, I have to have 250. And I'm like, okay, hear me out. Like, I'm not a realtor. I know there's some realtor rules, whatever. But I was like, hear me out. what if I go ahead and post it and try to find a tenant? And then if we get a tenant, like let's go ahead and sign a contract and not put a date on it. Like I'll give you the $250 if I can find enough tenants to cover the rent. In the meantime, if they go ahead and move in, like I'll sign the leases with them. I'll put your name on it. Like you can put your signature. Like I'll do all the stuff. I'll rent it, get everything set up for you. You can keep all the rent until we get to X amount, and then we'll execute the purchase. And she's like, yep, sounds good. I don't care. And I'm like, okay, cool. And so I'm on the hunt trying to find a tenant. The very first tenant I found, loved the building, wanted the whole thing, paid $3,500 rent. And I was like, okay, cool, we're doing this. So we went back, we executed the purchase. I bought it for $250. I did do a little bit of rehab, just like updating the kitchen area, like putting granite countertops, getting rid of the Formica, the old outdated look. I think it appraised for like $320. And so I have a ton of equity in that one. But that's how I got it. That was my definition of creative financing. Like it was not listed and she's stuck on, I want this number. And I'm like, how can we make it happen? Like I'll give you $250. I don't care. But I have to be able to cover the note. Because like I don't have any, I'm not at that level that I can just buy stuff and be negative on it. Like that's going to come out of my cop money. So that's how we did that one.
I love that. And to an extent, it totally is creative financing for sure. I think that's where a lot of people fear throwing in the low ball offers and being afraid of hearing no. And you're just great at, you get the no, come back with another potential option. If you get a no again, try another way, or eventually the person doesn't want it, you're just going to move on to the next one. And you're not getting upset because someone said no when you're offering a deal, which is why you have to get comfortable with hearing no a whole lot if you want to be growing to 30 plus potential properties and have a commercial space and multifamily. So that's just absolutely cool to see. And I'm so excited to see in another 2 years what you're going to be doing.
This is, I think, would be very encouraging for a lot of new people getting into real estate. Number one, you should be throwing multiple offers, not emotionally attached, and expect that you're going to get 50 no's. And that's okay. Somebody told me, like, you should be throwing 50 offers and you should get 49 no's. And I'm like, okay, I'm on it, And so at one point when I'm like heavy buying mode, I'm throwing like 20 offers a week and I'll get 20 no's. Nice. And that's fine. Like I throw the offer that works for me. And if they say no, that's fine. I don't want it because it's not going to cash flow. And so I'll go to the next one, Yep. But this crazy thing happened one time. I threw my offer and my realtor calls me back and he was like, hey, they've got multiple offers. They're calling highest and best. And I'm like, yeah, I hear that all the time. Whatever. Like that's my number that works for me. Take it or leave it, And he said, well, they have higher offers. And I'm like, well, okay, we lost out, And I'm actually driving to New Orleans to have like a girls' weekend. We were going to do a mud run. Super cool. And so I'm driving and he calls me back and he's like, you're not going to believe this, but they picked your offer. And I'm like, I thought you said I was the lowest one. He said, you were. That doesn't make sense. Why would someone pick the lowest offer? Like if they really did have higher offers, why did they pick mine? That does not make sense to me. I'm like, somebody's lying, And he's like, no, what happened, it was a succession and 2 kids inherited it. They lived in different states. They wanted the quickest, easiest money. My offer was the lowest, but I said I could close in 30 days, and I'm not going to ask them to fix anything. So my magic phrase is buyer will not request repair post-inspection. And so the other offers were like contingent on selling their house, or they were like 90 days out, or they wanted them to like service the AC unit or whatever. Everybody wanted something, and it was further out. And so they picked mine because it was the easiest and the quickest money. And at that point, it was like a light bulb. And it was like, I'm going to offer what works for me. And I don't care if it insults people. Like, you don't know people's position. Like, they were happy to hurry up and get rid of the house. Because you think, like, if somebody inherits a house, they're probably going to have their own house note, their own bills. Like, they can't pay their mom and dad's or their grandma's house note. So you're helping them by taking that burden off of them. So you can be the lowest offer and still win. That was the lesson I got from that.
Because it's true. You never know the situation someone's in. And that was even one of my uncles recently was selling his place. And what it came down to was the person that's actually going to close when they're saying they will. It wasn't the highest offer he took, but it was just the one that was going to more than likely work out. And wasn't even the highest one. So that's a great learning lesson. And it's awesome to see what you're doing, because most people just fear getting the no initially and having to go have a little pit party when they hear it. But it might be like 49 to 50 for how many no's versus that one yes that you're going to get.
If you think about what rejection is, what a no looks like, you put an offer in, they may have it listed for 150,000, but when I do the math and I'm like, well, the most I can pay is 100, that's what I'm going to offer. And I know sometimes people get insulted, and I don't care. What is the consequence of that? Nothing. I don't know those people. They don't know me. If I see them in Walmart, like, they're not going to come over there and shake their fist at me. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's nothing bad going to happen when you get rejected. It's just a no. And sometimes it's a no. Sometimes it's a heck no. But even then, I've got a heck no before. They were so insulted, and the realtor was like, "Whew, that was a hard conversation." And I was like, whatever, And I've had several times people have told me no, and 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, 3 months later, they have come back and they said, "Hey, is your offer still good?" And I'm like, "Yep, sure is." And I've done multiple deals where they told me no and they came back to me because, they thought they could get more and they didn't. Or now they're in a time crunch and they're like, "Oh, I have to move out of state and we have to get rid of this house." And so I got one of my really good ones because they were moving out of state and they were out of time. And I'm like, I'll take it. I have to do the 114, but I'll take it, And so it's like, don't be afraid to throw the low offers. Like, throw what works for you. And that's another thing is, like, people are like, well, it's listed for this. That doesn't matter. It's like everybody thinks their baby is beautiful, and most babies look like potatoes. So it's like everybody thinks that their property is so great and it's worth this. And it may be, but I'm going to throw what works for me. Don't even look at the purchase price. The purchase price is so irrelevant. That's what, the realtor told them, or their aunt and uncle told them, don't take less than this. And it's like, that's completely irrelevant. I'm looking at, does it cash flow? And I throw the offer that cash flows for me.
That is so true. How many times people are just waiting around thinking they're going to get that better offer and then come back months later like, "Hey, just kidding, I'll accept that offer now. Can we work it out?" And it's so smart to just keeping it where you're keeping on good terms with these people too, because you want to make sure that if they do come back in a few more months, you're going to be one of the first people that they think about. And so at this point in your journey, when you're searching for your next property, out of everything you've learned at this point, how do you analyze the deals and what metrics are you looking at?
Okay, so when I'm looking at deals for me right now, everybody kind of has their own thing. Some people really want high appreciation. Some people want cash flow. Some people just want tax benefits, whatever. I'm still looking at cash flow. Like, yes, I want it to appreciate, but I'm mainly looking at cash flow. So if I'm looking at a single family home, I've kind of gotten spooled to the $300, $400, and $500 cash flows. So if I'm throwing an offer on a single family home, I'm trying to cash flow at least $350 right now. And if it's anything less than that, then I don't want it. And with that $350 cash flow, I now figure in not just materials, but labor to pay someone else. So on the flips that we're doing, I have a contractor that takes care of everything. On the rentals, I've kind of built my own crew. I'm like, here's a flooring guy, here's a paint guy, here's a guy that owns his own construction company, and he does really good rehab work, like doing the countertops and backsplash and that kind of stuff. So I kind of played contractor and pieced my own little team together. Again, looking at single family homes, that's what I'm looking at. However, I have since realized that I feel like long-term rentals are really good tomorrow money. It's not great for today money. So if I'm looking at, I want to cash flow $20,000 a month. Like, I want $20,000 going into my personal account. Like, it's going to take me a while to get there with regular long-term rentals. And so my focus has since shifted to, yes, I'm going to still add single families, but I want to start adding multifamilies, because you think about, like, if one single family house is vacant, that's, $1,300 going out. Whereas, and it's just sitting, and, I have to wait. Like, I'm paying the note on that if somebody doesn't rent it that month. And so looking at multifamily, theoretically, depending on your numbers and everything, like, if one is vacant, the property can still pay for itself, So Absolutely. That's kind of where I'm looking at, is like, I'm going into multifamily. And then also, since I've joined this women's mastermind group, my brain has just expanded so much to like all these other possibilities. You know, again, I didn't even know about short-term rentals in my area until recently. And then I learned about midterm rentals like less than 12 months ago. And now I talk to people that are doing self-storage and they buy businesses and RV parks and all these different asset classes that my cop brain has never even considered. And so, yes, I'm still adding properties and I'm really looking for multifamily properties, but I'm also looking at what kind of business do I want to try to buy, or what other asset classes are going to be passive and good cash flow. And I feel like I'm looking at like, what's my next big thing that I'm going to go do?
And I can't wait by this time next year to see what you'll have and how many deals you're going to do and businesses and multifamilies you've purchased at this point. I know it's going to be double the amount of doors probably from what you have now. And just to wrap this up a little bit, 2 questions I'd love to hear the answer to. So what's been the most memorable point since you've started real estate investing?
There have been several great moments along the way. Some of the biggest ones have been not even at the rental property, but cashing a check for a BRRRR, whether it was $5,000 or $10,000 or whatever it is. And some of that pays bills off. And some of it was like, hey kids, we're going to Tennessee for the week. Like we're going to Panama City for the week and like going on vacations with my kids. And actually one of those, when we went to Panama City, I'm sitting on the balcony of our condo and I'm looking out, and that was my first time to go to Florida. Like, and I used a BRRRR to pay for this. And so my kids are in there watching cartoons and I'm sitting on the balcony and my husband's somewhere in there. And I'm like, I really did it. Like I really quit my job. I'm doing this full time. I was able to take $5,000 cash and pay for an entire week's vacation on the beach. Like, this is everything that I thought it was going to be. Like, I felt so much pride at that moment, and which is really hard for me because I'm always like, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just winging it. And then I'm winging it, but I'm a full-time investor and I'm on the beach and I'm like, this is my real life. And then on the flip side, recently, unfortunately, my dad had a heart attack a couple weeks ago and he's fine, but I go to the hospital and I was pretty much there every day for the week. And at one point I'm thinking about like, man, I'm so glad that I'm a real estate investor and that I don't have to call my boss and say, hey, can I take one more day? Or like, hey, do I have any sick time? Do I have any time on the books? Like, I'm going to be late tomorrow. Like not having to ask permission to do what I wanted to do. And that has just been the most amazing thing about, being full-time investor. And so the only thing I had to do that whole week, I had some coaching sessions set up where I coach other people on real estate. And I was able to send one text message and say, hey, can you move my coaching calls to, next week? And other than that, like I was able to sit there at the hospital with him. And, at the time I didn't know if he was going to make it or not. And so just being able to do what I want to do when I want to do, I was like so grateful in that moment. Like, yes, he's alive, but I'm here for it and I don't have to go anywhere or I don't have to report to anybody or ask someone permission to be with my dad in this time.
Exactly. And that's what it's about, is trying to have the freedom. I mean, the financial freedom, time freedom, I think for most of us, and just having the ability to travel. This year, you're going to be out of the country for the first time. You went to Montana for the first time. I think Florida for the first time as well. And that's life-changing when you get to really make your own decisions and how you want to spend your own time.
Yeah, it's really great. So my husband is still in that 8 to 5 and we're kind of like counting down the years until he retires so we can like go hang out together. And sometimes he'll take off and he's like, I just want to see what your life is like, today. And so he took off, I think it was last Monday or this Monday. Yeah, and we just hung out. I'm like, well, I usually go to PJ's Coffee and sit here for an hour and just chill. And then, when all the banks and everything opens at 9, then I go take care of my business. And so
I love it. And to wrap it up, what is one piece of advice or other golden nugget that you have for investors?
Don't let anyone tell you no. And I know I kind of touched on that, but like that is the most important thing. I think people have this mentality of like, well, I can't do that, or I'm not smart enough, or I don't have enough money, or like they come up with all these excuses of why they can't do something. And maybe maybe it's like, well, so-and-so told me, no, I can't do that or whatever. And it's like, no, you can do whatever you want to do. No one is going to stop you. And that's the mentality that I have, is like, I'm going to do it. And if somebody does tell me no, like, I'm just going to go to somebody else. Like, don't let anybody dictate what you can and cannot do with your life. And to go a little bit deeper into that real quick, there was some video that I watched a couple years ago, and it was like, you can make all the money you want, just work harder and climb up the ladder. And if you don't like that company, go to another company. Like, you can make all the money. And I'm like, I can't, because I'm a cop. Like, no matter how great of a cop I am that day, there's still politics and there's still salary caps. And like, I could be the greatest deputy ever, but I'm not going to be the warden tomorrow. You know, like there's limitations to that. And I was so discouraged. And it's like, well, I'm never going to be rich. I'm never going to have money. I'm just going to have to accept it, because I don't want to be a doctor. I hate hospitals. They're freezing and I don't like being cold, you know, like I'm just going to have to accept being a cop. And I love that, but I'm just going to have to accept that I'm never going to have money. And so it was really discouraging, but thank God I finally kind of went the other way and was like, no, maybe I can be a cop and do something else. And then when I started doing that something else, I realized like, oh, I can make way more money, have way more freedom, like no politics, like there's no policy, there's no boss, you know, like doing my own thing. And so the biggest thing is like, you can. It doesn't matter if you were poor, you have no family, I don't have any resources. Like, that's me. I mean, I'm closer now with my dad than I ever have been, but like, he wasn't around when I was little, and I don't have a good mom. I have no resources. I didn't know any rich people. Like, I didn't have a rich uncle. You know, I actually did a DNA test with my dad, and he's really my dad. So, you know, I wasn't swapped at the hospital. I don't have like a rich parent out there somewhere, you know, coming to save me. It's like I had no resources. I just had the drive that like, I want this and I'm going to go do it. And you can't tell me not to, you know? So that's the thing. It's like, if you want it, freaking go do it. Don't let anybody stop you.
I love that so much. And you are just one of the most inspirational people. I tell you this all the time, and you can change your life at any point, no matter what age. You were deep into your career, did a whole career change right before 30, and it took some time, but I mean, 2 years is incredibly fast to see the growth you've done in that amount of time. And coming from something that wasn't even related to real estate, being a cop has no connection to that, but you've learned so much, you've grown so much, and you've changed your family's life. So I'm very excited to see this next year where you're going to be. And I know it's going to be a tenfold probably of what you've already done your first 2 years. But again, thank you so much, Michelle. It was absolutely wonderful to talk to you today. And please let people know where would be the best place to contact you if they'd like to reach out.
Yes. So I know a lot of people are on Insta. I am a Facebook girl. And so you can go to my Facebook page. My business page is J Ranch Properties, just the letter J, Ranch Properties, LLC on Facebook. And you'll see, you know, some of the rentals we have posted, and like all the crazy things I'm doing. But if you message that page, I look at those messages every day. So Facebook Messenger is like the best one for me.
And I'll make sure to attach that in the show notes. So again, Michelle, thank you so much. I'm super excited for people to get to hear your story and appreciate you hopping on today.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation. This was my first kind of interview, and I'm like, ooh, but thank you so much for this opportunity.
You rocked it. Thank you so much.